start thinking of a CoE. So you find yourself in a point where you start thinking that you actually need a CoE or an internal team, however you want to put it. And the first question that I propose to ask yourself is whether you want Anaplan applications as IT assets or business assets. And I will explain what that actually means. So you come to a business guy and ask, like, who actually owns this application? You might hear an answer like, what do you mean? We are the guys who actually tell where this application is going, where we actually want it deployed, what we want out of it, how it's going to change, and so on. From this perspective, okay, it's the business guys who own it. But for this question's perspective, I propose to think of this in a manner of a balance sheet where you have your assets and liabilities, right? So business guys are the ones who get the value out of it. That's where you calculate the return on investment, like what's the benefit of having this application. By liability, which is the hard part of having an Anaplan application, I actually mean all the work that needs to be carried out so that the business gets that value. So technical ownership, I would call it. So asset isn't a liability, right? It's the other side of the coin. And by figuring out who technically owns it, who changes the models, who provides access, who delivers the fixes, as any service level agreements that you want that fixes this fast, are we actually hitting the target in terms of having things resolved fast? This is all the hard bakes of having an Anaplan application. And if you want to give all of this to your business, then that's like the easy answer to you. That's a business asset. But if your business guys actually want someone to give hard time to on why this thing has been broken, that's probably where you want the ownership in the area of an IT asset, where you have some techies who actually address things, and they are the ones who prevent bad things from happening, because business might be doing some things not exactly in the right way from the technical perspective. So this is the key thing when you want to talk about the ownership that's connected to business asset or an IT asset nature of the Anaplan application that you have. Now, it can be very common to think of these two options as the opposites of each other. And I've been there. There were arguments, which one is better, why you should go this way but not this way. And what I would propose here is to take a step back and think of these two as consecutive phases of the Anaplan CoE evolution, so to say. They are not the opposites, as they might seem outright, and maybe they can even be combined sometimes. But the next points that we are going to look at will probably help you adopt this thinking and help you answer the questions for your CoE in a better way. Let me give you the summary of what I'm trying to get at here. So the IT is more mature, while business can be more innovative. Might be in disagreement with this, but again, this is my personal thinking coming from practice. And to look at this from different perspectives, again, I would propose to take a step back and think of the nature or the origins of the applications, of how they actually come about. And from my previous experience, I have seen applications originating from two broad sources. One of them would be a user process driven or grassroots, so to say, where you have a department when there is some technically savvy guy who has developed an application in Excel or Microsoft Access or maybe even C#. So the process is there, the person wanted to optimize things up and they have developed something. Sometimes it happens directly with Anaplan when they are already familiar with it. And from this perspective, this is an application that is growing upwards, right? And let's get a step ahead of this for a moment. So such applications, in terms of their life cycle, they very often come and branch out twofold. Sometimes they spike innovation. Some other departments actually adopt this, or in different geography, or after developing things in Anaplan, they actually think of new features which they see can easily be developed, and this can be quite fast. And at the same time, which is actually not mutually exclusive from what I have just described, I need to be wary of the situation where an application is so customized for that user alone, or one or two, and that it dies off after the position change of that person, of a group of guys. So what you need to watch out for in this case is that at least there is some precedence, so new people actually taught properly how to use those applications, because very often such grassroots applications, once the person who invented this is gone, or maybe, I mean, he wasn't the one who developed it, but he was the one who requested it, the application might die off. Okay, so if you have the case where most of your applications are user process driven, then maybe business asset approach is closer to your case, and you should probably bolster this and prolong the innovation cycle, spark the innovation, and try to keep this as valuable as possible for as long as possible once the project is over. So this type of applications I would characterize as bottom up, and this is closer to business asset. Now the other possibility is that there is a process that's being imposed on different geographies or different departments that are part of the same process in a very unified way, and that new process has to be followed by everybody. The forms should be harmonized, the reporting should be looking the same, the raw data should be looking the same, and so on. So this is top down, as I would put it. And in this case, it is very difficult to imagine a business asset approach doing a successful job, because when you try to unify things across the countries, for example, very often it's easy to go into the customization and pay too much attention to a certain country but not to another one, or maybe develop the features that are used only by one country but not the other ones. That's like one side of the thing. That's demand side of the things. You need to fix things and maintain things. The bigger the deployment pool that you have, the more complicated it is for business to actually carry out with the operation of that application. Okay, so for this case, very likely you should think of having it as an IT asset, where you have a central team who actually looks at the things through the same window. When you have new demands, new changes, new fixes, and you have two sets of different eyes, so to say, looking at this, not having the same guys and doing the demand and the delivery. It can also be a criticality driven project, and doesn't necessarily have to be a global process, but you might have an application so important that you need to be as much certain of no faults with that application as possible, because technical side of the things with Anaplan, it might seem easy, and it is easy compared to bespoke programming, But the more complicated your application becomes, the easier it is to break it. Okay, and if you have an application where you have certain requirements on having things done, reported, processed, I don't know, let's say within a day or half a day, then you need things to be done fast. You need to make sure that nobody from business actually breaks things up, because else they won't have anyone to actually complain about, right? They have to point the finger at somebody. And there is nobody except themselves. And if it's a critical application, okay, it's a vicious circle. So for criticality driven applications, it's better to consider an IT asset kind of COE. Now, the next point is somewhat connected, especially when I talked about the criticality driven applications. So the cost of errors and mistakes can be low, it can be high, depending on the nature of the application. If the business guys are so familiar and so into the business process that they can easily fix things even outside of Anaplan, for example, or on the fly, then okay, the cost of error is very low, and this is definitely fine to have business technically owning that kind of application. Now, in my previous experience, I also have been in charge of the team with the different platform, which was providing service for the manufacturing department, and that was 24 hours production cycle where the factory didn't stop, not for a minute, and the cost of mistakes, as you can imagine, can be quite high in that case. That's why you don't want to give business a lot of control, because they should be busy with the stuff that they are supposed to be doing, the business process, not really the finding and fixing the errors in this case. And the more complicated the application, the easier it is to break it. And the more brains you actually need thrown at that case to actually address it. Okay. Now, fraud risk is pretty much the same. It's just the impact on the business process. And to give you an example, so imagine you have an Anaplan application where you have trade promotions calculated. There are some trade promo campaigns going on, and let's say the bonus of the team, the commercial team, or actually depend on what you have in the system. And if the admin guys, who happen to be business guys, technically owning it, so to say, if they can manipulate this, means they can increase the bonus. Okay, you have the problems here. Yeah, of course, Anaplan can provide you this history to figure out who actually changed some of the calculations, but again, that is something that you come back to in some time if you actually discover such a fraud. So if you have such applications where this can be an issue, and not just, okay, you have this kind of points in pretty much every application. If this is a very, very sensitive part of the business process, maybe you want to think of having it as an IT asset right away and skip the business phase. Okay, so the next point is scalability. And here I'd like to talk about two angles on this point. One would be the resources constraint, and the other one is ALM, application lifecycle management. So the resources constraint. So imagine you have an application, regardless of user process driven or grassroots, or having it as a global process originating application, and you want to deploy this across geographies from North America to Australia. And it is very hard to imagine that the same team sitting in one location or even two locations can actually do that. They should be thinking of the business decisions and business actions versus thinking in terms of how many models do I need to deliver, Do we have enough cloud space for that? Okay, what are the user access that should be provided across geography? Okay, and who is going to support that regardless of the time zones? Okay, so that's like the first and an easy people thing. The other thing is the ALM consistency. That's more of a technical thing. So Anaplan has such a great feature called application lifecycle management, where you can have one development model which connects to as many test models as you want and as many production models as you want, and you can deploy quite fast. So you need to make sure that in that development application, which is the origin for all the production models you have across geographies, that is again as fault free and country dependency clear and faultless as much as possible. So just to give an example, so let's say you have South Africa having certain features which are not applicable to all the others, all the other countries. So it is again quite hard to imagine that the business guys would be operating it, and the more countries you actually have this model deployed to, the more difficult it is to believe that business guys would easily be doing it. And I'm only talking about turning on the features. Think of the bugs, the fixes, and so on. So again, don't burden the business guys with these responsibilities, because they should be thinking of the business decisions and business actions versus thinking of all these, well, techie things, so let's call them that way. And that was on scalability. The next point is on compliance and security. And the bigger the company is, and if you're a publicly traded company, the more importance it should get. You probably have heard one or two things about this. So in organizations that I have just described, there is particular attention, especially to systems that are connected to financial processes at the very least. And there are certain controls that have to be established and operated to avoid certain kinds of risks. I also already mentioned the fraud risk, which is connected directly to the segregation of duty principle, where you have one guy using the model, the application, and the other guys administering it and developing it. They have to be two different kinds of entities. And the other easy case to understand would be salary planning. You don't want people from a different department or from a different country to see the salaries of the other guys. And again, this is directly connected to who grants access and how you actually maintain things. So if this point is of utter importance to you already, maybe you should consider having Anaplan application as an IT asset right away, skipping the business asset phase. Okay, so this is the fourth point. And the fifth point is the one of universal language connected to costs. So the costs could have been the main point that you thought about when you started thinking about the COE. Okay, and when you think about the costs, very often you just compare the salaries, and you can have your business partner or third party that has certain rate card. Then you have your business time. So you have business guys who also get their salary, and they would be spending some of their time. And then you have the IT guys' salaries. And these are the three that are usually compared with each other. Okay, the third party, very often, especially at the beginning of the project, very often they are one of the highest. The business analyst's time or business user's time then would be compared with the IT time. And the mistake that is very often done is that, okay, so maybe the business guys are not that more expensive, or the other way around, versus the IT guys. What you're missing here in this analysis is the opportunity cost. Okay, now the business guys, instead of spending their time on the business processes, they are doing the technical stuff. And it's fine while it's at the phase where they are innovating, spiking changes and so on, fidgeting with the new modules, new features of Anaplan, which then will deliver the value. But the further you are down the line of implementing Anaplan across the organization, the more difficult it becomes for them. So when you're doing that comparison, don't forget about the opportunity cost when business time is actually spent on technical things rather than the actual business. Okay, so this would be the resources part, the resources side of things. There is also the technical side of things when we talk about costs. And the first thing that comes up is model optimization, because the guys who are very proficient with Anaplan, they are more likely, a lot more likely, to know how to deliver applications at cost efficiency that you usually want. And just to give an example, I have seen and conducted reduction in terms of the cloud space while still keeping the performance good by 50 to 70%. And I mean, it's not because people don't want to do it, they're just not thinking about it. That's not their job very often, if you give this to business guys. So the cloud space usually is the consequence of not having proper resources doing the development. This is one of the reasons why you might want to consider, okay, business guys have done some kind of proof of concept or built something on their own. Then you need the IT guys to come in and refactor the thing, rebuild things so that it actually is optimal in terms of cloud space. And you might not feel that difference within 1 or 2 months because, okay, we're already paying for the licenses, we still have lots of cloud space and so on, but it becomes more of an issue with the new projects and new features that you will want to implement in the future. Okay, one more thing in terms of the optimization is the performance and the modeling standards. So these two things very often are in contrast to each other. So sometimes you can optimize things so well that the model is going to work not as fast as you want it to be. So again, the experience is what you need when it comes to model optimization. Bringing it back to the original point, if you have any of the issues with the size and you still have it as a business asset, maybe start thinking about having it as an IT asset. Talking about the resources costs, okay, very often you want to get away from the third party because in Anaplan world, usually in the project phase, that's the biggest side and biggest part of your costs. But then after that, be careful when you're comparing the business time and the IT time expenses. Okay, so this would be the 5 points that give you more areas for analysis when you try to find the answer to having it as business asset or an IT asset. What could be the bottom line questions? Okay, let me throw in a couple of more things to help you. So the first thing to consider when you think of the application or a group of applications is whether you need service level agreements. How much time do you give someone to execute a request to provide access? It can be informal, but I mean, is there any minimum time that has to be followed? Like, what's the worst case scenario when the access has to be provided? It's like the easiest thing. Now, if things get broken, how fast do you need the systems to be fixed? depending on the severity of that kind of incident. Things are actually pretty bad. How fast do you need things to be solved? And this will directly be connected who should be owning it. If that's not much of an issue, business asset kind of approach is totally fine. The closer you are to the point where that becomes important, that's probably where you want the IT guys. Next, an easy point. Do you have any concerns about your costs? And by that, I usually would mean the model size. The models are taking up too much space, or you are having so many resources from the third party delivering things for you, which you might not necessarily need right away. It can wait for 1 or 2 months, sometimes even, before they actually get delivered. But again, that's like the second question. And in this case, think to incline more towards the IT owned asset. Okay. And the third one, are you in position to skip the business phase? And the idea I was getting at, this is absolutely natural based on what I've seen in different organizations, where you first have Anaplan as a business asset and then having it as an IT asset. Maybe you are at the phase where business is delivering innovation and generating a lot of new value from fidgeting with the Anaplan modules, creating new features. You might need more attention in the future to ensure that they are implemented in an optimal way, or you want to give them a sandbox. But think of where you are in terms of the life cycle. Maybe it can be mixing. You have one department still having a lot more control over things, but the other one, okay, you don't want them messing with the systems. So think of this as one of the guideline questions when you try to figure out, is it going to be a business asset or an IT asset? To summarize, think of these two approaches as consecutive phases that should make things a lot easier. You shouldn't strive to get everything from the first go. Again, Anaplan preaches the agile approach. Why not adopt the same approach to actually setting up an organization? Because the requirements and the initial steps that you might find in training, they might not be exactly fitting to your purpose. So try to answer the points as much as possible, and that ideally should bring you to the answer. What is the ultimate model that you should try to adopt in the next 1 or 2 years? So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.